any SAS man, any human, anyone with any sense of compassion or responsibility would, if they were prepared to take the risk with their own lives, prefer to do the alternative, which is to enter that stronghold and take these bastards alive and pull them out and not kill or hurt the innocents that are around them.
SAS men jump back onto the balcony and storm. After 6 days and almost 11 hours exactly, the siege is over.
Okay, Richard Williams, thank you very much for joining me. We've been talking about doing this for quite a while now. I'm going to start by explaining a little bit about who you are. We obviously met a long time ago when we were both troop commanders in the SAS. That was a while back. I left and have been in the media since. However, you stayed and had a stellar career, quite frankly. Went on to command the regiment, which is something that very few can claim to have done. It is the premier special forces unit in the world, I think, undisputably. In my opinion, and several others. You're someone I know that's very strategically aware. You're politically aware. You've worked with Stanley McChrystal. You worked with Tony Blair. I think you can say that without telling any secrets. And really wanted to get you on to talk about what I'm calling anyway, SAS bashing, which is that the SAS, which is a fine regiment on the battlefield, has in recent years, the last couple of years anyway, been attacked legally from a number of fronts. And the SAS is not a company, it's not an organization that can defend itself, doesn't have a PR wing, doesn't have legal representation. And really, I just wanted to get you on, and I suppose my first question to you, Richard, is really what the hell has been going on?
Well, before I answer that, I want to correct you, Tom, on one thing. I commanded G Squadron of 22 SAS from 2001 to 2003, which was obviously Iraq, Afghanistan, UK counterterrorism, and a number of other things. Short time at Staff College teaching, and then commanded the SAS from 2005 May to the end of 2007, effectively 1st of January 2008. Then left and then became a civilian. And in the mining industry, essentially, where I've been ever since. So a little bit more to your introduction, and yes, we did meet each other when both troop commanders, when we had more hair, weren't wearing glasses, and our knees and hips didn't hurt so much. So,
and I think from your description there, anyone who knows the timeline of that can work out that those were quite busy periods for the Special Air Service, and you were there, and in many ways wrote some of the templates for operations going forward. So so back to my question is that this. It's not a conspiracy, but for the last couple of years, the SS has come under attack. So what is your view on what's been going on, perhaps why this is happening? It's several different angles. We can talk about Afghanistan. We can talk about clone inquiry. We could talk about the repeal of the Northern Ireland Legacy Act. But there's a general perfect storm facing the regiment at the moment.
What we call lawfare, and it's branded that now, it's a very useful tool for those that wish to limit the ability of UK to use legal force within war or within operations other than war. We call it lawfare because the impact of it could have a material impact on our ability to defend ourselves. And you sort of then ask, well, who is conducting lawfare against the UK military or the UK? And this is where it's hard to determine. If you're trying to pick an enemy, if you're trying to pick Russia or China or a former terrorist organization or a current terrorist organization, you could find yourself getting into the world of the fantastic. Join the dots between what's happening to the SAS and a malign Dr. Evil somewhere pulling chains or pulling cords designed to get lawyers to cripple us. Or alternatively, you have a look at our system and see that well-intentioned ideas and concepts are being taken to a point at which it's critically affecting the ability of British soldiers, SAS or otherwise, to conduct their business. And so the why is a very good question to start off with. But I'd say that this is more, it's not a Dr. Evil. It isn't a group of people trying to pull it together. It's more circumstantial. It represents a good thing in one way, which is the citizens of our country, via their elected officials and legal institutions, making sure that soldiers do their business in ways that is commensurate with law, national values, democratic principles, etc., etc. That's a good thing. None of us should be free to do whatever we have to do, regardless of the standards and values of the country. And that's always existed. And then you then have it perhaps taken opportunistically by individuals, and Phil Shiner is the example of a lawyer who saw an opportunity to create legal cases that turned out to be unsubstantiated and unsupportable against British soldiers who'd been conducting operations in Iraq, Afghanistan, and elsewhere. And then you have, at the moment, a series of questions being asked about Afghanistan that need to be answered. But in there as well, at the same time, you have in Northern Ireland the retrospective application of European human rights law to a series of operations that were conducted in the 1980s, in this case, and the 1990s, by the SAS, which is opening using new legal arguments, long closed investigations in ways that are quite clearly of interest to Sinn Féin IRA and their supporters. So when you sit within the SAS camp, I'm not within the SAS camp, but you and I are both sympathetic to those that are, and you have a look outside, you say, well, hell, I've got to answer questions about Afghanistan through a government-directed public inquiry, which is more like an inquisition. And at the same time, my seniors and forebears and mentors are having to answer questions about operations directed from on high and approved on high, and post-operational reports agreed or from on high, and previously investigated situation. They're all being opened again. You can see why people go, there's got to be more to this than just legitimate review of what we've done. And that's why the connection between what's happening and the statement of lawfare as an entity, as a thing, as a campaign, that link is made. But that's why your question is so difficult to answer.
Yeah, I think what I suppose you and I would agree that there isn't one Dr. Evil, and a lot of this is opportunistic. I suppose if we take the most recent and work back, if we take Afghanistan, and perhaps for a bit of an explainer for people who I never served in Afghanistan, so I'm not an expert other than what I see and people I know, but there were essentially two Afghanistans. There was the quite successful removal of Al-Qaeda, which necessitated the removal of the Taliban, and that necessitated the installing of the Northern Alliance. And then there was a second NATO-led mission, which was the one that didn't do so well. And within all of that, the SS were deployed. I think everyone knows that. I mean, it's in the courts, it's in the papers. Talk to me a little bit about, if you can, about why were the SAS sent in? What was the purpose of this? And why is it now being investigated?
Yeah, okay. Well, as you said, there were two. The story is important. When September the 11th happened, we've got to recognize that was the largest single action of mass murder against the UK citizens in peacetime. It wasn't just an attack against Americans. A lot of British citizens died in that attack. And the government of the day, led by Tony Blair, agreed to support, for its own reasons, but for alliance reasons, the operation to destroy or dismantle the terrorist organization that had committed that act, that was housed in Afghanistan and supported then by the Taliban regime. And the SAS was going to be a leading part of a US, UK operation, military operation, to do that. And so elements of the SAS deployed very early on in 2001 to conduct aggressive offensive operations against the Al-Qaeda network as part of a wider, primarily special operations, but supported by all the other instruments of coalition to go after Al-Qaeda and bring them down. And one part of that led to the removal of the Taliban regime. We all played a part in that. And then the replacement by, led by Hamid Karzai, of a new government. And then there was a pause. Okay, we still haven't got Osama bin Laden. We still haven't dismantled the Al-Qaeda network, but with a new government in Afghanistan, working with them, we could, over the long term, deny Afghanistan to Al-Qaeda, even though it would move somewhere else. And then in that pause, which went on for a couple of years, there was a discussion about what is it we want Afghanistan to be in the future, and what is our role in that. And Donald Rumsfeld at the time, I use him as just a representative of one part of the argument, was saying, look, we can never make Afghanistan a functioning, rich, wealthy, stable part of the global system. It would cost too much, and there are too many challenges, and no one's been able to do it before. So what we should do is withdraw from that effort and just be prepared to go back into Afghanistan anytime that Al-Qaeda appears, and we should bomb it or raid it and attrit it whenever necessary. We should need to leave behind a base to be able to do that. Quite an efficient use of military force, but wouldn't make too many promises to the Afghan. Now, into that mix came a number of nations, not just the UK, but the UK was a big voice in this, that said, actually, it would be far better for the long history of the world if we were able to stabilize and develop Afghanistan in ways that it was everything I just outlined. And that would deny Al-Qaeda over the long term the room to breathe. But that would cost a hell of a lot of money and would depend on us doing something that had never been done before. Building a state using international money in a coalition while there was active military opposition. Mm-hmm. Everyone talks about counterinsurgency and all these other things. And there's a lot in there, which there's a lot of lessons that are exceedingly useful. And people look back to the 1950s and 60s and operations there. But doing it as a coalition where you've got to get alignment on everything from how you use force, how you detain people, what laws are used and so on, had never been done, not at the scale anyway, that Afghanistan. So people rather naively went into Afghanistan going, look, we can do all these great things. And soldiers being soldiers or militaries being military lent into it and did everything they could. And in the British sense, that manifested itself in round about 2005 when I took over command of 22 SAS, to Britain taking control of a Reconstruction team in Helmand province to make Helmand the British area of operations. And a number of us were tasked to take a review of the probability of success there, with the existing resources and the plans and the vision. And frankly, we were very, very pessimistic about its chance of success. I think I said at the time about we won't succeed under current direction, and it would cost our soldiers about 500 dead and many multiples of that wounded. In the end, and sadly, I wasn't far wrong. I don't say that with any sense of satisfaction, but it was said we will get involved. And so Britain bravely got involved in this, withdrawing forces out of Iraq to sustain it over the long term. And as we know, things got pretty difficult very quickly. And in spite of bravery and skill and energy and all the things that we're proud of, and that we should be very proud of all of those things, courage and effort, things were not going well. And so the special forces, which had not just SAS, a mix of SBS, SRR, and others who'd been doing what they could to help the conventional forces down there, had to think pretty carefully about what else it could do. And so it was decided to concentrate Special Forces effort in Afghanistan from around about 2009, after I'd left the army. And you saw the SAS return with SBS and others all helping back into Helmand to conduct offensive operations against those Taliban and associated enemies that were very successfully at that time and with great expense to our troops, planting IEDs and doing other attacks that were denying our troops the ability to operate. And it was very expensive in terms of lives. And the SAS were part of that effort, a leading part of that effort to protect the British forces so they could do its work. And they had, over a period of time, 2009, and I can't remember the precise date, but over 3 years or so, they had a really significant effect on those that were putting the bombs out. And you saw British casualties halve, and you saw mission progress. And what essentially the guys were doing was doing similar to what we were doing in Iraq, or exactly the same in terms of tactics, which was raiding a network of enemy that were hiding within the villages and compounds and towns of Afghanistan, and coming out of their hiding places to plant bombs and kill British soldiers.
Yeah.
And so we had to go into their hiding places, not me, but one's successors, one's team, to rip them out. And on detention missions, which should the enemy choose to fight, could end up leading to their death or our own deaths. And they did that time and time again with significant effect.
Yeah.
That's the sort of kind of history up to that point.
I mean, I think you might be selling yourself short. I mean, I think your USP might be that you speak truth to power, Richard. And I know the inside track of that conversation about, wasn't it something along the lines, if you want an insurgency, I can give you one. Your warning was very clear that the wheels were going to come off the Helmand project.
Well, I'll explain to people. I'll also do a bit of a history lesson. And Tom, as you know, SAS abides to a number of security requirements in terms of its operations and its past operations. The Official Secret Act being the most serious of them, but also below there, an internal disclosure policy, which is managed by the MOD, that's designed to limit the amount of public disclosure of its operations to ensure that operating security and partnerships can be maintained. We're in a new situation now, Tom, whereby the public discussion about the SAS is being driven by its critics. And the Ministry of Defense and the instruments of state aren't countering that. They aren't putting out statements saying, this is what the SAS does, this is what it did, this is what we're proud of. The general statement is we don't comment on, it's been a long-standing policy of multiple governments that we don't comment on special forces. So sitting within the special forces camp, and the SAS camp in my case, you're saying, well, every time I pick up the paper, all I get, or I listen to podcasts, or I listen to whatever media, is I'm getting the voices of the critics with no recourse, no defense being presented. And so a number of us, not just me, are coming forward and saying, well, let me provide a little bit more balance to that narrative. I'm not happy. I'm not against being criticized. I'm not against being argued against. But what I am against is having to sit there and take it with no recourse. And the institutions of state aren't doing that. So hence we're in this interesting position. But a couple of points that I also mention is in the public Iraq inquiries and books, or in the public Afghan inquiries and books, you won't find any reference to special forces because of that reason. And so when historians are sitting and having a look at what happened and who contributed, they're going to only have a part of the story. Special forces make a contribution to campaign success. They're a multiplier. Their ability to use the highest levels of intelligence, their skill, their tactics, and their nature allows them to do things tactically, conceptually, physically, that conventional forces or other agencies involved, intelligence agencies, political agencies, can't do. So genuinely, when you look at the history of warfare since the Second World War and operations other than war, Special Forces made a meaningful contribution. Special Forces aren't the solution to everything. They're part of the solution to everything. And I want to say that right up front, because there is this perception that you beam us down from the Starship Special Forces and we can solve everything, and you beam us back up and we don't leave a footprint. There's a perception out there that that's how it works. The other thing I'd say about Special Forces is they're very useful in potentially diverting a conflict. And a conflict can be a global thing, or it can be a local thing, and conflict could be a terrorist incident. The most sensitive period before a war is starting or before a terrorist incident is happening, and you've got intelligence about that, you can discreetly deploy Special Forces and other entities to stop it happening. And because we all work together, Tom, on all of this, and we know the big concepts, but out there it's not well understood. So I mention all that because I want people to understand is that Special Forces' contribution to Iraq and Afghanistan was meaningful, significant. It wasn't the only contribution, but is not well understood out there. In Iraq in 2003, when one deployed into Baghdad, one's primary task was to work with agencies to try and discover where the weapons of mass destruction were, energetically and believing that they were there. And in the end, it turned out they weren't what intelligence had told us they were, but intelligence is a flawed thing, and it needs to be checked. But in order to do that in 2003, we were operating within an American battle space. And you can't just sort of drive around there, particularly if you're in civilian clothes, dressed as locals and so on, without coordinating with the very, very dangerous entity, which is the American military. So you plug into a headquarters that has control of that battle space and an agency that has control of resources. And that was the Joint Special Operations Command, the Tier 1 Special Operations Force in America that was born out of their attempt to rescue hostages in Iran in the early 80s, and had become at that time, and it is today, the world's leading combined special operations, Tier 1 special operations capability. Better than anything in the world, I think. So we plugged into them, and in order to conduct intelligence gathering operations, we had to start raiding houses, buildings, and vehicles that intelligence had indicated were containing those that had insight into the regime's weapons of mass destruction. And this was all at a time before the so-called insurgency stood up, but at a time when you could feel that starting to happen. It started to become very dangerous indeed. A lot of people were getting killed on the American side, and we were just keeping ahead of that by luck and skill. When we were doing all that, we started to appreciate that the way the Americans were developing their intelligence architecture, hunting for targets within an urban area, within somebody else's country, was not running a series of human sources, but it was electronic, cyber. It was gathering information via remote, GCHQ type analysis or gathering, and then analyzing it, and then producing targets very, very quickly that one could go out and hunt. Phones and laptops, all possession of those that we thought were serious threats. And so in 2003, the British Special Forces suddenly learned about that method. And we didn't know about it properly before. We hadn't operated with that properly before. And we started coordinating with the Americans to go after the weapons of mass destruction. And then when that turned out to be a dry hole, we started to work with them on other threats to the mission in Iraq and the wider counter-terrorist mission globally, remembering Al-Qaeda was always part of it. And so we started to coordinate with the Joint Special Operations in Command, where a partnership started coming together. And then by 2005, when I returned as commanding officer, that partnership was very well established. And in 2005, although it was really 2006, with the bombing of the mosque in Samarra, that suddenly led to the global, from an Iraqi sense, insurgency, that JSOC started to go after this emerging threat, which was Al-Qaeda in Iraq, that was pumping suicide bombs into Baghdad and elsewhere and killing thousands, not just by car bombs, but by assassination squads of Shia as well as Iraqis, as well as Americans. Remembering the Americans, on average, were losing combat deaths, 450 deaths a year in Iraq, on average, over the time they were there. And in Afghanistan, it was much less painful. They were losing only, but this is a huge number, 141 combat deaths a year. So Americans are losing a lot of people, and much more than the Iraqis were losing a lot of people too. And so it became a strategic target. And so Stanley McChrystal, who I met at that time in 2005, leading the Joint Special Operations Command, an American general, said, what can we all do more together? And for that, there was a series of corrections we had to make with our system, London all the way down to Iraq, to make the British contribution to the American-led operation more effective. And I helped to do that. And so what then happened was the squadron that we deployed forward, and there was more than just a squadron, there were elements in addition to it, could suddenly work within this American targeting machine to capture or kill those that intelligence indicated were part of this suicide bombing network. And the intensity of the targeting was such that the guys had to go out every night. And that is doing a house assault into a building, not just house assault, but we'll keep it into that space, into a building in an area where there are no friendly forces, or very rarely friendly forces. Everyone is potentially a threat. And inside that building, there are suicide-capable, lethal, determined enemy who, when you enter that building, are going to try and kill you. And then, having entered that building, they are to fight to gather the intelligence, i.e. take the person alive with all of his electronic data, and then return them to a system that will gather that intelligence, process it, and develop more targets. So our men were risking their own lives to capture an individual who was trying to kill them, and they were doing that night after night after night. Logical alternative, if you don't want to take any human risk with your force, was to simply bomb the target and kill everybody that was there. And having seen the bad end of bombing in Iraq, which does kill children, women, innocents, any SAS man, any human, anyone with any sense of compassion or responsibility would, if they were prepared to take the risk with their own lives, prefer to do the alternative, which is to enter that stronghold and take these bastards alive and pull them out and not kill or hurt the innocents that are around them.
I'm just going to stress that for the audience, because I think what you've hit on there, and the way you've explained it is really clear. But just to reiterate what you've just said, so for the civilian audience, the reason that the SAS, the reason special forces might go into a building is because they're going to retrieve hard drive or whatever. But the alternative of dealing with this threat is to blow it up with a drone strike or to bomb it, with all the collateral damage we know that entails. And I think if we roll that forward, the logical way is, if you disable the special forces and that component for military operations, that is the way that solution will be rolled out. It won't be a special forces operation. It will be a drone strike, if you can possibly do it. Is that a fair assessment of what you've just said?
It is. I mean, it's a very, and again, I've written on this too, Tom, as you know, it's something that's lost because, Hollywood, which is very useful in terms of presenting a lot of the nature of these operations, but has to have a degree of artistic license and develop a story, doesn't cover this choice as well as perhaps I hope we're trying to do here, which is when you're sitting remotely in your comfortable operations facility, having your cup of coffee and tea and slept well, and a piece of intelligence comes in, and you're analyzing the ground, and saying in a war zone like Iraq or Afghanistan, this particular individual, it is worth risking our lives to detain, because not only will that detention reduce risk to our colleagues, the British soldiers, the brave, incredibly brave, young mainly British soldiers walking through the IED fields in Afghanistan or the similar in Iraq. We have an alternative. We could just fly a bomber over, a man bomber or a drone, and destroy him and everybody else that's contained with him. And there is a discussion that goes on, sometimes at a very high level, called a collateral damage assessment, about whether that is the best option. Will we, in dropping a bomb, kill a lot of innocents? Will we destroy the opportunity to gather intelligence? If the answer to both of those questions is yes, you then have to look at the special forces operators in the eye and say, are you able to get to fight, if necessary, to a point in very dangerous circumstances where you can gather this individual, take him off the field and his friends, and bring him back, questioning, and then subsequent exploitation. And those men have got to say, yeah, we can do this. With the skill, energy, courage that we've got, we'll go and do it. And we'll do it in a way that won't or has the minimum chance of hurting anybody else. That's Afghanistan and Iraq.
Yeah.
But it came from, I mean, there's lots of foundational requirements to be that determined and skilled, as we can talk about. But it came from the hostage rescue requirements. I mean, the history of special operations, close quarter battle in counterterrorism, started as a result of the massacre of Israelis in the Munich Olympics in the 1970s.
1972, yeah.
Along with all that terrorist campaign that was coming out of the Middle East that was ripping the guts out of innocents throughout the world. And it was a hostage rescue mission. And in a hostage rescue mission, as you and I trained all the time on, is you're going into a building, dark, smoky, with enemy in there, and you're seeking to suppress the enemy to rescue the hostage. It's incredibly hard. And as you and I remembered, this takes much more than guts, drives, energy, and youthful enthusiasm. It requires training and practice and control and discipline and self-examination and practice and practice and practice to the point at which you are accurate and your judgment is accurate. It came from that. Culturally, it is embedded within all SAS men.
Yeah.
To keep your cool under those circumstances, to kill, if necessary, only those that seek to harm you and the hostages, and rescue thereby the hostages. And brilliant, brilliant special operations work has been done ever since then to achieve exactly that. So that's the bedrock that we're talking. But in this case, we're not seeking to rescue a hostage. We're seeking to detain an individual armed, if we can, to bring him into a position where we can exploit what he knows and what his electronic data collected in phones and elsewhere knows, to go after his friends and rip the guts out of those who seek to murder our friends.
Yeah, and not to labour the point, Richard, what the alternative of the drone strike, there are going to be no lawyers investigating the collateral damage, the death of children and women in the buildings that are knocked down by the drones. I mean, you've alluded the net result of this current threat to the SS, I'm talking about the legal challenges, could be that politicians are very reticent to send special forces units into these circumstances, because who the hell wants this mess on their hands afterwards? If you're a minister of defense.
In the spirit of me being me and sharing, is that I remember a very great senior policeman when we were doing UK counterterrorism in my time said to me, Richard, you must remember that no minister of state will ever appear as witness for your defense in the inevitable investigation that will follow this operation. They never do, they never will, they never have done. So you own the outcome. They will direct you to do it, but they never come down from the lofty heights of Mount Olympus to join the gladiators in the arena and say, yeah, I told them to do that and they did a brilliant job. The nearest anyone has come to that probably is Maggie Thatcher after the Iranian embassy siege. And I think if she was alive, she'd stand alongside us very clearly in this and say, look, you're getting this confused. For understandable reasons, our country needs to hold our troops accountable for what they do. And I support that. I fight for democratic values and good versus evil. I don't want to be part of evil. But there's a limit to what you should be asking. And you can't bring what essentially is close quarter battle warfare in a special operations context within a room. You can't examine every single part of that in ways that would take no account of the situation faced by the soldiers. And I feel that some people here try and look at a close quarter battle fought by very brave people under very difficult circumstances and try and judge it as though they were, analyzing how someone cooked a meal. It's very, very different. So go back to your point about political examination, collateral damage, and so on. There is a process before you bomb any target to assess that collateral damage, and the chain of command signs off on what it is, and on it goes. But it's quite sort of clinical. It's distant, and there'll be minuted meetings, and there'll be sign off, and so on, and people will be able to answer to those questions. That's not the same in a room combat situation when guys are going into a room and they're having to analyze on a split-second basis what the threat is in front of them. There isn't a committee sitting there. They aren't minuting their independent review of intelligence assessments gathered over weeks and discussed calmly over cups of coffee around a table, and they all leave and say, yeah, I'm content with this, and unfortunately the children have got to die. That's the reality of this. These are guys in a room making that type of decision under amazing pressure where people are trying to kill them. The two things are not the same. It's far easier for a minister to sit and say, yeah, I endorsed the bombing of Dresden, than it is to say, well, I stand with, this is the bizarre thing. I stand with Soldier Z, who made a split-second decision that led to the death of an individual that he thought was carrying a weapon. Why can't a minister come down and stand alongside Soldier Z in the same way the minister would stand alongside the committee who decided to drop a drone and kill the kids?
I'm going to jump around a little bit because it's an interesting point you made there, but we're going to have to talk about what you think should happen. But I mean, I'm just going to jump. There was the coroner's inquiry and the standard of proof that we're now up against. I mean, if I read the coroner's inquiry, so this was a operation took place over 30 years ago, Northern Ireland, which you'll know about, and the coroner made. I don't know if you've seen the inquiry, but I read the whole thing, and the sort of summary was that the coroner found that the operation was not planned and controlled in such a way as to minimise to the greatest extent possible the need for recourse to lethal force. That was the coroner's statement at the end of that inquiry. So is that the legal measure that we are now going to operate by? Is that what the operators are supposed to be thinking when they go into this building, that they need to minimise to the greatest extent the recourse for lethal force? I mean, that's very confusing if you've got a gun in your hand in a smoky, dark room and you're trying to work out who's who.
Well, it's an interesting thing, isn't it, really? In the years after the event, someone with no military experience at all is able to pass judgment about what was going on in the minds of the commanders and the individuals involved when planning and then conducting an operation at night against lethal terrorists, and saying that in their judgment, years after the event, there was a better way to do it. Doesn't seem very convincing to me. Seems very convenient for those who seek to continually prolong the struggle between the IRA and the British government by allowing this lawfare to be conducted against the agents of the British government in ways that does great harm to the individuals involved. It's another form of retribution. So I have no sympathy or support for the statement made by the coroner in Clono, and he needs to look and the system needs to look very carefully at how it comes to those assessments. Because what it implies is that all of us involved are simply in the SAS to kill people. We're not. The death of a terrorist is as a result of the terrorist actions in resisting arrest or continuing to prosecute a murderous intent in ways that can only be countered by lethal force, delivered by brave men in very dangerous circumstances, exercising their trained and well-developed judgment. It annoys me beyond expression. So I would say that the judgment that people have to make on the use of military force is, are they happy with it in the round? What you're asking soldiers to do is to trade their lives and the lives of their enemies for your chosen and hopefully by definition better outcome. War and all conflict, which people forget about, is about trading lives for outcomes, yours, your enemies, and where unfortunately it happens, the lives of civilians, for political outcomes. Would that coroner have preferred it if for 4 terrorists dead, there'd been 4 SAS dead? Would there have been some form of remote moral equivalence to this? I'm pretty sure the IRA would have preferred it. But in our particular case, we're here to conduct controlled use of violence to deliver political outcomes at the minimum cost to us, the enemy, and civilians. And unless you're comfortable with that, you can't ever be a political leader responsible for directing the use of military force. And if as a country you aren't prepared to resource, recruit, and support militaries in those endeavors, you are then completely defenseless. Just go and ask the Ukrainians. Look at the cost that they have had to expend against a lethal enemy trying to destroy them. These are academic questions. You have to get to the fundamentals of it to be able to decide whether you want to defend your society against such threats or you don't. And the next question thereafter is, those that you have charged to do this, do you trust them? And do their actions prove that they are worthy of trust? And this, of course, is the big question that people are getting to ask themselves at the moment through all these investigations and public debate. And this is why I'm sitting here now saying, I would like to present on behalf of the organization, the individuals concerned today, in the past, and in the future, the case for trust.
I think that's where it's interesting, because I think that's where this really lands. I mean, I've used that example because that's published. So we know there's going to be the publication of the Afghan inquiry, and there will be other publications. If the Northern Ireland Legacy Act is pulled back, then there will be further investigations, further publications. All of this, as you are saying, is going to be analysed a long time after the event, broken down very slowly for decisions that were taken in the split second. But what you're trying to outline there is, what do you think the solution is? Because at the moment there appears to be no trust in the system, because we've now got, essentially, we've had that inquiry, we've got the Afghan inquiry. If we get the repeal of the Northern Ireland Legacy Act, we will have more inquiries. What needs to happen, Richard?
This, it's interesting, because this seems to be more political than legal, but the two things inevitably connect themselves. On Northern Ireland, it does appear, and I'm simplifying it, it does appear that the retrospective application of European human rights law, enabled by the 1998 Human Rights Act, is allowing coroners and others to reopen cases against special forces in particular, but it's not just special forces, it's wider army and security forces over the Troubles. That is to no one's benefit. And that needs to stop. When the Prime Minister talks about it's the victims we must think about here, what victims are we talking about? are not the soldiers who had to fight and risk their lives and lose their lives when fighting that vicious enemy, do they not have some form of status with respect to that definition? And is it not better for everybody that this rather clever application of new law that wasn't in existence then, to create these questions that you just outlined? Well, I think remotely as a coroner that it could have been done differently. It's not getting us anywhere. It's not achieved anything. Let's just stop all that. And I can speak simply because you've asked me for simple answers to difficult questions. I know there's more to it than this, but I'm speaking as myself. On Haddon Cave, it appears, and I don't think they're substantiated at all, to be frank, but my opinion on this matter, because I wasn't there, is just an external opinion, to be a series of cases that have to be answered. And it was the judgment of the Secretary of State at the time, Ben Wallace, that this is best done in a public inquiry chaired by the very experienced Lord Chief Justice Haddon Cave, in a way that delivers or not criminal cases against special operations forces that were involved. A lot of SAS men, but a lot of others. I think it's about 250 special forces guys that are being called to Haddon Cave. And it's not just SAS, by the way. Quite a big number. What's interesting about that process, and I'm not in it, I'm not called as a witness to it, and I have hearsay like everybody else informing me, but I've listened to podcasts from others, JK and others, and I've heard stuff, is that, just to give you a feel for how Haddon Cave is that statements that are made by soldiers without legal advice after an incident, before they go out on another raid against other lethal enemy, are being used as evidence, or forgive me, to compile evidence against the soldiers in ways that just doesn't seem legally sustainable. None of those statements were taken with legal advice. It was a rough and ready, combat record. And so what you've now got in Haddon Cave is special forces guys turning up because they're required to and saying, I'm not going to answer any of these questions. Haddon Cave appears more inquisitorial, and I'm not a legal professional. Now, I don't know. I mean, I respect Lord Chief Justice Haddon Cave, and I respect the instruments of state, but it does seem to me that the way in which it's being conducted is the bases are loaded against our guys. And I think that needs to be brought up. And questions need to be asked about, well, okay, with the best of intentions, we started this, but has this now entered a place where fairness doesn't apply? The big step back from all of this is say, okay, we've got this happening in Ireland, we've got Haddon Cave, there will be other things happening. The guys who were pulled off the ground the other day as a result of some hearsay from some Afghan, or whatever it might be. What can we better do systematically to ensure that those who are conducting these operations on our behalf aren't forever, in terms of their lifetimes, subjected to never-ending investigations based on very, very flimsy information and created in ways that actually benefit our enemies and competitors more than they benefit our society? What can we do about that? Well, hell, I'm all interested in what the brains and energy of, just say, the Ministry of Defense and our legal profession can do about that, because at the moment they haven't got it right.
Yeah, you answered the question I was going to ask, which is, we both know people are being picked up and charged with murder in front of their families. We know people have lost their jobs. I've got a bit of an inside track because I know one of the guys looking after them. People are these operators went out for their country, risked their lives, and they're in terrible states. I think if you knocked over a newsagent in Tower Hamlets, you'd at least have legal representation when you were picked up by the police. This is a shambles. And I don't quite understand how it's come to this. I'm not clear. If it was supposed to be an inquiry, I'm not clear why this is, it's become sort of a witch hunt, in my opinion, from what I've heard. I'm just wondering if there's anything that you think can be done at the moment, because we're deep in the weeds with this inquiry.
Well, it's very complicated, isn't it? And it's difficult. And we must make our case, as we're doing now. And the elected officials of our country need to take a view on whether the current conduct of this is in the interests of the country that they are elected to serve or not. You know, what is the Secretary of State of Defense doing other than saying, well, I can't get in the way of due process and I won't speak on special forces? What is the instrument of state that supports him doing for us? And if they're doing nothing, they shouldn't be surprised that people like myself speak up, as I'm doing now, or the organization seeks and the individuals seek to protect themselves in the way that any normal citizen would seek to do so, with legal support in ways that produce a powerful and winning argument in a court of law, not just in the court of public opinion. And so I think it is political. Go back to that point. What is it that the state wants to do to ensure that what we feel like is a witch hunt is brought under some degree of sensible control? And I'm not particularly interested in the arguments presented by Minister Cairns and others that, oh, yeah, well, what we're trying to do, or the Secretary of State of Northern Ireland, is what we're trying to do is we're trying to involve the Republic of Ireland in the discussions associated with what should be investigated and others, given that the Republic of Ireland was supporting, as everybody knows, the IRA in that conflict. It's about, I mean, in that particular case, you know, the post-conflict narrative is being skewed by that because those that were charged to go into Northern Ireland to protect the state and its citizens are being judged here as the bad guys. And the other side, who was participant in all this, is allowing to drive that judgment. There's a really fundamental thing here, Tom, where I'm not seeking to be defined by this, but you need to think a little bit. People should need to think about this. If you have the professional, the most, serious professionals, that SAS soldiers and others that do their work over their lifetime, being questioned this way, in their heart, they won't admit it out front. They've got to start asking this question. Is the society and the leaders of that society that asked me to go out and fight this evil on its behalf, are they now judging me to be that same evil? What does that mean for how I define myself and my life? None of us go out to do evil. We go out to deny evil the ability to hurt us. And so the messages that are being sent by this opening of cases in Northern Ireland, or Haddon Cave, or as you said, the ripping from his home in the presence of his children, a serving SAS lieutenant colonel, to go and answer questions in ways that frankly make him feel like a common criminal on the basis of hearsay coming out of a conflict zone. Are we the evil? I don't think so. And we are not by nature people that seek victim status or people feeling sorry for us. In fact, it repulses us. But those who are sensitive enough to listen to my words, but words of others too, might want to ask that question. By doing all of this, what message are we sending to these guys and those that are thinking about volunteering for the armed forces? That at the whim of an enemy or a critic at some point downstream, we can reverse the narrative and make their lives work, even though it's directed and approved by the state to be something horrible. I'm worried about this, Tom, and that's an understatement.
Yeah. And I think you should be. I mean, I think your point that nobody knows. If it was a company, we'd have lawyers, we'd have a PR wing, we would be publicizing what is going on today and the threats posed by many people who want to harm the British Isles, civilians, that every day operators are dealing with. No one could talk about this, right? So we're having this bizarre situation. And I don't know what the solutions are, but it's got to stop. I think that, and specifically on the Northern Ireland thing, I think this is very, very misguided. I cannot see, and for people who perhaps don't know, 1/3 of the Irish Parliament is Sinn Féin, which is, wants Ireland to be reunited. The idea that there's there's going to be any sort of legal sense in these inquiries is nonsense. And it's been proved, because we've got one inquiry, which is, extraordinary inquiry, which, the coroner's inquiry is worth reading because it's nonsense, in my opinion. And I'm wondering how much of that's going to come out hand cave. So look, Richard, we've done a lot of talking here, 1 hour, which has been brilliant. And thank you very much for coming on. I would say that it's an honor to do this. You have made the point at the start that you're doing this because of what's going on. This is not the normal situation. There's an archer that operates with the SAS. We don't talk about anything for a good reason. It's supposed to be secret, but the situation is such that people like yourself and others are coming forward now and talking publicly about what's going on. So I do want to say thank you. Thank you on behalf of all of those operators who are under threat and are in a terrible situation, really terrible. And for all those who are still serving today. So Richard, thank you very much. Is there anything we haven't covered? Do you want to say? Any last points?
No, thank you, Tom. I know we've spoken about this a while, and all those that are interested in a fair presentation of all sides of this should thank you, Tom, and people like you for giving us the opportunity to do this. And as you said, it's not about us as individuals. It's about the remarkable work that these guys are doing today for us and will do for us in the future, and supporting them and backing them because that they need it and they deserve it.
Hear, hear, Richard. Well, thank you very much.